I'm Jessica Peresta, host of the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Teaching While Queer is a podcast for 2S LGBTQ+ educational professionals to share their experiences in academia. Hi, I'm your host, Brian Stanton, a theater pedagogue and educator in New York City, and my goal is to share stories from around the world from 2S LGBTQ+ educators. I hope you enjoy Teaching While Queer. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Teaching While Queer. I am your host, Brian Stanton. My pronouns are he, they. I'm so excited to have with me today Carla Stephens. I was going to call you Clara. That's wild. My apologies. But I'm so excited to have with me today, Dr. Carla Stephens. How are you doing?
I am doing very well. Thank you very much, Brian. I'm so happy, excited to be here with you. I'm the director of the BARD Queer Leadership Project. And, as we go through this podcast, you'll hear why this is such an amazing opportunity for me and a good fit for the podcast, because the BQLP is really about LGBTQ plus youth and creating a wonderful educational experience in a nurturing environment. And it was designed in partnership with queer youth. So we're at Bard College in Simon's Rock, which is in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And it's higher education. So a dual major BA program, so students can get a BA in whatever field is of their passion. And then while they're doing that, they can also have a leadership concentration. And I teach some of the courses that are part of that leadership concentration. But our ultimate goal is to one day grow to be the first LGBTQ plus college within a college. And so that's really exciting. So, in this climate where we all know that it's, can be so difficult to be a queer student, and, to have an opportunity to have a place that's designed for queer young people with the idea that we want to break the rainbow ceiling by flooding the world with queer leaders. That's what we're hoping to do.
I'm here for that. That just sounds so wonderful. Because I think not only from a representation standpoint, but also like for so many of us when we were younger queer people, there wasn't this like future that was obtainable. And I, when I did my undergraduate at San Diego State University, had the privilege of being one of the first people to minor in LGBTQ studies, or LGBT studies at the time. And I loved that because I got to learn more about my culture and my history, which isn't taught. And so there was this whole lack of representation. And here, I think that it's so wonderful that the focus is on leadership and getting people out into the world to really lead from within the queer community, because I think that outside of queer organizations, people don't drop that they're a queer leader unless it's, needed, or if it's even tokenized. Which sometimes it's like, oh, look at us, good PR, wink, wink. But I love this like focus on leadership. I actually recently found out about a podcast called Queer Success, I believe.
Oh.
And I've only listened to the first episode, but what I love about it is this person is just finding successful business people to interview who are part of the queer community and talking about like, how do you overcome some of the discrimination that you've dealt with? How do you thrive? Some practical business leadership conversations. And that's one of the things that I think we're missing as a queer culture is there is a lot of queer trauma represented in the world, but we need queer joy and we need queer success and we need queer leaders. And so I love that Bard is doing that because that is so necessary.
It is. So I agree. We are working on our own podcast called Leading Queer. We haven't dropped it yet, but we're working on it. And we've had we've had 3 so far. Bard Queer Leadership Project, Queer Leader forums, and where we've brought in some amazing queer leaders to talk about their journeys, and so we're going to continue to do that. So along with Queer Success, you're going to have another place where you'll be able to hear myself. My provost is also queer. Have us, in conversation with queer leaders in all kinds of different careers. So that's exciting. So you mentioned that, how important it is to kind of understand history. The 4 pillars of our program are actually, yes, leadership in theory and practice, but also queer history and culture, queer theory, along with career pathways. So we're trying to hit all of that for, developing, or we agree that all of that is needed in developing queer leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. Just on so many levels. So send all the queer podcasts to me, people. I am here for it. I am all about amplifying queer voices, and I haven't even told those folks that I'm going to talk about their podcast because it's just brand new to me. But I just love when there are positive queer voices out there spreading positivity. So yeah, thanks for doing what you do. Yeah. So let's take a journey back in time, if you will. What was your experience like as a queer student?
Okay. Well, first I didn't know that I was queer. So I'm old. Well, okay. I am an elder in a sense. I didn't come to my understanding of myself as queer because I grew up in a culture, both, the 60s and the, in the time period. And because I grew up in the African American community, I grew up with one of the most important people in my life being my grandmother, who was very religious. And so I didn't even have an idea of what queerness was, let alone the fact that I was part of such a community. That took a long time. And yet, I say that when I came out, all of these people kept telling me that they knew that I was queer long before I knew that I was queer. So it's really interesting. But, I had moments when I can remember being 14 years old and being a tomboy. And, having some of my best friends being male and going back on the block and having some of the girls. So in one day, I had one group of girls say to me, "You're such a whore hanging out with all of those guys." Because, in their minds, the only reason why I'm hanging out with them and the only reason why the guys are hanging out with me is because I'm having sex with them. And then on the same day, I had someone call me a lesbian, and I didn't even know what that meant. And I deny it vehemently, even though I didn't know what it meant. And so it's really interesting that both of those perceptions of me were negative, just
Yeah.
because I was a girl who hung out with boys, and I was being, attacked by girls from both ways.
That's
So
so interesting. It's like a lose-lose situation.
it is a lose-lose situation. So what I have as an adult gotten out of that is the fact that because those kinds of things were happening, it freed me to just be me, because I couldn't please anybody. I tried figuring out what it meant to be a girl, and I just wasn't good at it, whatever that was. And eventually I was rejected by the boys, because I wasn't a boy. And so, you know, so even, I can say now that it was lonely, but it was so freeing, because I didn't have a choice except to, you know, be myself, whatever it is, because I couldn't figure out, gender didn't make sense to me. Race, the way it was applied, didn't make sense to me. And so, through this whole intersectionality that I was embodying, I just, became myself. And I, before the job that I have now, I was first founding faculty and then the principal of a high school early college in Newark, New Jersey. And as the principal, we had a PD, and I did a session on memoir writing. And one of the things that, one of the exercises that we started with was writing a 6-word memoir. And my 6-word memoir was, "The box is not big enough." So there were no boxes that I fit. And it was really clear to me early on that that was true. And so I didn't blame myself. I blamed the box.
Yes,
So
absolutely blame the box.
blame the box. And I'm sorry that there are people who spend their lives trying to fit and failing and feeling like failures and being depressed and hurting themselves, and it's not them, it's the box. So I I will say it was a blessing. It was, I feel very privileged to have a certain kind of intellect and a certain kind of temperament that allowed me to just kind of live my life and strive towards my goals, as best I could, regardless of the noise. So.
I think that's wonderful. The thing, well, one, if you're listening and you don't take anything away from this podcast, but the box isn't big enough and blame the box, like, that's gold, chef's kiss, like right there. Because so many, I remember trying to fit into all these boxes, like baseball player, which was not a good box for me. And then it was like, star student. Okay, fine, I can do that until, chemistry AP. And then I couldn't do that anymore as a performing arts kid. But performing arts kid, I could fit into all of those boxes. And maybe it's not a matter of like finding the box, but realizing there's multiple boxes that you could like dive into for different aspects of things. But if it doesn't fit, I love that. It's not you, it's the box.
Right.
The box isn't right for you, not you aren't right for the box.
Right.
And I love that, because I think there's so much shame that comes from, especially when you're younger and you're alone. There's so much shame spiraling that happens around, I don't fit in, and I don't feel like I'm a part of this community or this community. I'm different. I'm strange. I'm wrong. And that there's so many I am this thing, as opposed to the world is different. The world is strange. The world is wrong. The box doesn't fit. Um, and I think that there's something to be said about blaming society, blaming the world, and like moving on from that. That if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit for you. And if there's something wrong with a specific box, it's the box and it's society's issue. It's not your problem.
No.
Just know it's not your space.
And being weird is fine.
Yeah. The best people are weird.
So by the time I got to high school, I had a group, and we called ourselves the Motley Crew because we were all weird. And we found ways of being in community together as outsiders. So that was that was the thing that held us together, the fact that we were outsiders. But that worked.
I love that. I think there's something about, and it's so funny because I think introverted people do this a lot, where you're like with a group of people who you can tolerate enough, like, especially as an introverted person, right? Like you can tolerate larger doses of these people and allow yourselves to be yourself unconditionally and unquestioning. And then like you go break off and you go do your own thing, but then you come back to this core group of people. And I think that that is so necessary, and something that I hope that younger people still do. Yeah. Find that group that you can go do your own thing and come back to. I also think that's huge, fantastic advice for like relationships in general. Like if you're going to be married, if you're going to be in a long-term relationship, like you do things together, yes, but you don't do everything together. Go find your thing that you do by yourself and then come back, because you need that me time to be able to then be okay being around other people.
Right.
Even if you're extroverted, I know it might be hard to sit with yourself if you're extroverted, but like sometimes you just need to sit in a room by yourself and listen to the air conditioning, you know, or whatever. That sounds lovely, right? Yes. It would lull me to sleep. So you talk about these boxes that didn't quite fit and come and like discovering yourself later in life. What box did you create for yourself? How do you identify now as an adult? Queer. Okay, great.
So, yes, that's a really good question, and that changes often. And I'm at a moment when it's really changing, because for a while I identified as lesbian, and then I was in a conference a few weeks ago, and Robin Oakes, who talks about bisexuality, was doing her presentation on bisexuality, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then we have a queer book club that we've just started. So one of the speakers at our BQLP Vision Forum was Skylar Baylor, and who is the trans NCAA, the first trans NCAA Division I swimmer from Harvard, who is also a speaker, and I have discovered an amazing writer. So he's written a YA book called Obi is Man Enough. And his newest book is He, She, They. And it talks about transness, Um, and I never really identified as trans or non-binary, but I already mentioned that I don't quite understand gender, so I'm like, well, maybe if that's a box that might describe me, that might be a box that I fit in. So it's, especially as the language changes and as the community understands itself better. You know, you said you were, at school with, what was it,
T. Yeah, LGBT. And that is,
LGBT.
was it.
That was it. There was no plus, and
Mm-hmm.
so the the under so one of the superpowers, a word that I hear often connected with the queer community, and how we are world changers, culture changers, game changers, is, being out in the margins, creating new language, creating new ways for humanity to look at itself, creating the movement possibly towards non-binary thinking. I'm so not good at that yet, but because I've spent a long time being programmed in a particular way, and I know that the brain works most simply in the binary, but um, all of these things are contributions that we're making to a changing world, and I'm so excited about it. So the box is getting bigger. We're making the box bigger, and it's and what I'm hoping is that, and something that I got out of your workshop when you were talking about, the importance of community. I hope that we're not stretching ourselves too thin, that we can still hold together cohesively as a community across difference. Um, that's hard for humans to do, and so it'd be amazing if, as we grow, we can still remain woven together in community.
Absolutely. There's a lot of beautiful imagery that came out of what you just said. The woven together I really love because it's interlocking pieces that are kind of like different pieces that are fitting together. Um, I love that kind of textile imagery. And then you've got this rainbow flag behind you. And as you were talking about, like, I learned about this and I learned about that, it got me thinking about watercolors and how, like, our rainbow, I mean, your journey isn't going to look like solid lines like that beautiful flag behind you. It might be a watercolor where, like, a drop of this is happening here and things just kind of morph together. Um, you were talking and I was like, this is beautiful what's happening in my brain, but I don't know if I'm explaining it well enough for those of you who are listening. But I just love this imagery that came to me because it really does feel like that watercolor, you drop one drop and it's going to spread
Mm.
until it dries. And then this is kind of how things are now. And then you go learn something else, and that's another little drop that happens, and it spreads some other aspect. And it might seem frustrating to folks that there's no like end point,
Hmm.
but the whole thing about life is that you should be constantly growing and learning, and that includes constantly growing and learning about yourself.
Absolutely. And you talked about introverts and extroverts, and I know this understanding that I'm about to talk about. Somebody, some philosopher or somebody, talked about it before me. But when I think about, other people being mirrors, and so you know, you when you're having those moments when you're with people, you're seeing them reflecting aspects of you, and as well as their own, whatever their own vibe is. And then when you say you go off by yourself and you process that and you make decisions about what the mirrors are that you, or who the mirrors are that you have around you. And I'm married. I chose my wife. She has a particular understanding of me that I want to grow into. And so we are a really strong couple because we're growing together. We're not, we're not, we didn't decide, I love you like you are now, you love me like I am now, we're going to stay this way forever. That and we're going to stay in this relationship forever, which is how relationships get broken, because people don't stop growing. So, one of the, I mean, it sounds pretty self-centered to say, yes, I'm in love with my wife because she makes me look good, or but part of the reason why she is good for me and the relationship is good for me because she's always challenging me to become my better self.
Absolutely. I think, yes, we are here for the relationship advice today, folks, because I think that really is right on point, because so many of those relationships end with like, you don't love me, you love the idea of me. Well, at some point that idea was who this person believed that you were. And so, yes, people change, and when you're in a relationship, it's going to be difficult, but you are going to have to change and adapt together.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you just stay the same person that you were when you got married, oh gosh, heaven forbid you got married at like 18 and you're going to stay the same person for how many ever years? Like, there's no maturity that happens. Your relationship actually, I don't believe, can get stronger if you don't adapt and change together. So, yes, I'm here for all the relationship advice. Yep. So, how do you see, aside, you run this like queer leadership program, but when you were working in the Newark school,
Mm-hmm.
how did you see your queerness like showing up with working with students? Were you already at that point in your journey, or did that come afterwards?
So I have a story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so if you don't mind me, I have two stories to tell, if you don't mind.
We love stories.
Okay, so so the first story is the fact that, in part because of life circumstances, I didn't become an educator till later in my life, and I got my PhD, and I had huge anxiety about getting a job. I thought, I'm too old, I'm too Black, I'm too female, I'm too queer. I am never going to get a job. Is where I was. The too old part was the highest one of those things that I thought was going to be a barrier. And before I graduated, before I defended my dissertation, my wife found a job for me. Well, so she found it. She saw a job ad for a school that didn't exist yet, and she said, "This is your job." And I said, "Okay, maybe you're right." And so when I had my first phone interview, I was really blessed that the person I was talking to, I had the sense of as being queer family. And I'm like, oh, that might not be a barrier for me. I don't know about all the rest, but that one might not be a barrier for me. And clearly none of it was, because I got the job. And then I was a teacher in a high school in Newark, New Jersey. 85% of our student body was Black, and then most of the rest were Latinx. And I was I wasn't worried about the students. I was worried about the parents.
Yep.
And so I'm laughing because it was just so ridiculous. So on back to school night, I said, you know what? I'm going to wear a pink shirt. Somehow or another, that pink shirt was going to make me look less queer. um, the kind of nonsense that we have to wrestle with. Um, there were students who suspected that I was queer. There were students who had no clue. Even when I came out, they had no idea. Were surprised. Mostly the boys were surprised because I have kind of a maternal vibe. And so I stopped worrying about the parents. And by the spring semester, I decided I'm just going to be my full self. I'm going to put on a tie and see what happens. And it was absolutely fine. I had, a homophobic student who came to talk to me, and we had conversations. Did I make him less homophobic? I don't think so. But we had a really good conversation. So the question that he asked, because one of the ways that I came out to my students was to talk about my family. So I have a birth daughter, and so that twisted some other kids' heads, like, you had sex with a man? What? And I was like, yes, because I didn't understand myself to be queer at the time. And, I wanted to be normal, and I wanted to be a mom. And so this is how that happened. And so the homophobic student asked me, like, so what was better, having sex with a man or having sex with a woman? And I said, let's have a conversation. And so it was good to feel free and to be able to have that kind of conversation. So that's story number one, that those are some of the ways that I came out, just talking about my family, the clothes that I wore, and really trying to no longer worry about the parents at that point.
Are you okay if we take a pause before story number two?
Absolutely.
Because there's one thing I want to point out, is one that I don't think specifically white people realize the hierarchy of like intersectionality that other people deal with. You went through a list of like, I'm too old, I'm too black, I'm too queer, I'm a woman, like all of these things that intersect in your identity, and they all caused some sort of negative impact on your perception of being able to get a job. And I feel like more people need to understand identity fully, that it's not just I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm black, I'm white, I'm Asian, I'm gay, I'm straight. It's like all the things. All the things that you are make up your identity. So it's really interesting to me, because one of the like many things that I've taught at various conferences, like we met at a conference, and one of the things that I taught in October at a different conference is like, how do you show up with your like your full identity in a classroom setting when people are like, well, you can't be your full self? And I'm like, okay, great. Well, tell me which part I'm supposed to take away. Because if I take away husband and I take away dad because you want me to take away queer, that's three things of my identity I have to take away. So if I take away queer, then I also have to take away this, this, and that. And so it's the intersectionality of identity. I think a lot of people toss identity into something that's really easy and manageable, into a nice box that fits. The problem is the box is wrong. it's not actually a box, it's an octagon or whatever it is. Like it's multifaceted. And like the first thing that popped in my head was like, oh gosh, look at all of those hurdles that she talked about. Like, you're literally defending a dissertation, which is hard enough. It is hard enough, and you are worried about all of these things are going to impact your ability to get a job. So wild. And not wild in the sense that like I'm not trying to make light of it. I mean, more people need to realize how this intersectionality plays into life for a lot of people.
Yes. Yes. I was going to go on a tangent, but I want to get back to the story.
Dude, let's go. Story number 2.
Yes, story number 2, because I was, again, fortunate enough to have to be a good teacher, and to love my students and create relationships and have it was a very hard job creating a school, but growing the school with the students, creating the culture with the students, that made it possibly a little bit easier. And having a boss who was queer. So he was fellow faculty, and then he became my principal. And then when he left for another position, I became the principal of the school. And that was another thing, because now I have to deal with a district.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not thinking that I'm too old or too Black, because I've told you it's a district in it's an urban district. And so being Black was an asset. Being female was an asset. Being queer, I had no idea where that fit. And even though my former principal was queer, he was not, I won't say he wasn't out, because he was himself, but he is a queer white male who went to Harvard in this urban district in Newark. So he had a whole nother set of of equally struggles. Like, he was one of maybe 2 or 3 white principal, school leaders in this school district. And he just didn't want to add, being out and loud. So he was kind of out, but he was definitely not loud. He was quiet.
Yeah, my husband and I used to use the phrase palatable gay. Like, we're the palatable gays because at a faraway glance we could look straight, and we're white. And before I kind of identified as queer, I was a gay male. And so because I was a gay male, I was white and male, and from a distance I looked like I'm straight. And so you kind of have like this shield. And I refer to it as like the palatable gay people. They're okay because they look like they're normal, quote unquote.
Right. Well, I don't. And I wasn't trying to. So, well, I won't say I wasn't trying to. I actually wore a woman's pantsuit when I went to my interview. Again, camouflage didn't really work, but it made me feel better. Made me feel safer.
Yes.
Right. And that camouflage helped me to feel more confident than I would have if I'm not wearing a tie today, but I usually do. Mm-hmm. And so so once I got the job, at least in the district, in my understanding, I was the only out loud queer principal, and it seemed to be fine. I still was concerned, again, about parents, because it's a magnet school, and I'm thinking, OMG, myself is going to have an impact on our ability to attract students.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all me. I know. I'm owning up to the fact that these are all my fears, and there's reasons for the fear, but I wasn't confident. And actually, like right before I left, so I was principal there for 6 years. I was out in my school, and, my students understood. And my parents understood, because I am always authentic, but I wasn't, I was going to say, I, let me finish the story. So one of my students got into a fight. Her mother came to the school, was in the office. I was trying to deal with the aftermath, the investigation of the fight. And her mother was a little inebriated and very angry and screaming in my main office. And one of the things she was screaming is, "I want to talk to your gay ass principal." And so, someone reported to me, "This parent called you the gay ass principal." And I said, "Really? That's awesome." and and they're like, "Dr. Stephens, that's disrespectful." He said, "Her daughter is in my school. So whatever she thinks about my gayness, number one, she's acknowledging that she knows that I'm gay, and she has entrusted her daughter to me."
Mm-hmm.
So she may have been trying to insult me. I don't feel insulted because I am gay and I am the principal. So that isn't insulting to me. That's just true. But the good thing is, she entrusted her daughter to me at the school, knowing that. That's a good thing. So I actually had a workshop mostly with students. Well, we call it a chat and chew. So we had a chat and chew. I had a chat and chew, and the title of the chat and chew, we sit around like a brown bag lunch. We sit around and we snack and talk about things. And the title of that chat and chew was Becoming the GAP, right? and and so, really having conversation. Mostly queer students showed up, but we had this conversation, and again, they're like, "Dr. Stephens, that's disrespectful," and I just wanted to give them that point of view, so that they can understand that you don't let other people define who you are, and you don't let other people define how you value that. Yours is not their value. Whatever their value is, they have it. It shouldn't impinge upon my understanding of my value or my selfness, because somebody else thinks that calling me a gay ass principal is an insult.
Gosh.
Right?
I think like every classroom needs that conversation, because so many things are taken, like the world is so angry all the time right now. And sometimes I just wish people would take a breath and realize, like, that person can say what they want about you. Why does it matter? Brene Brown talks about this in several of her books, but she talks about like giving the cheap seats. Like if you're in a big stadium, like a baseball stadium, and the person who's yelling gay ass principal, or in my case, like when I was younger, people, fag across they're yelling it across the baseball field. Like, why am I going to give that person who's way up in the nosebleed section all of the air in the room when there's a whole bunch of people around me who are there supporting me? And so I'm a huge proponent of that, because I think that we do need to have this kind of emotional intelligence to be able to know when it's okay to be like, I started responding to people who yelled fag at me with like, yes, can I help you? Because like you said, it's a truth. So why am I going to get offended by it? They want to be offensive. And if I'm not offended by it, then they just didn't get what they wanted.
Exactly. They don't have power over you. And so, again, talk to my students about the buttons. And because when they get into fights, it's like, Dr. Stephens, they said this about me, or they posted this about me. I said, okay, why did they post that about you? Probably because they wanted to make you mad. Did they succeed in making you mad? Then they have power over you. And they're going to keep having power over you as long as that bothers you. So if you hide your buttons, that doesn't mean you don't have them. That doesn't mean that you're not hurt by this stuff, because you are, because you're human. But you don't want to give other people power over you by showing your buttons so that they can push them.
Yeah, absolutely. I got the imagery of like those little plastic covers that kind of like fold over buttons. Like my button's still there and you can see it, but there's this plastic layer that you cannot push that button.
Right.
And only you have control over that. And I think that a lot of, especially young people, I'm sure it is harder and feels more difficult, especially after isolation and quarantine, to be able to kind of get back into the world and just let things, dust right off, or water off a duck's back, or whatever that phrase is. But that is one thing with regard to emotional intelligence that I just feel like is so necessary for people to learn. So hopefully some people get little tidbits from this conversation, because honestly, this conversation is pretty fantastic with practical advice for life. We're winning at this podcasting today.
Thank you.
So I'm talking about how it's a little bit turbulent. You've had experiences where there's some turbulence happening, and you had your own approach to how do you handle that. If you have a new teacher coming into a school situation, and they're like you, they're maybe battling multiple intersectionalities, and they're unsure how to show up authentically at school, what kind of advice would you give them?
So I can't be in everybody's head, and so the answer is kind of different for different people. As I said early on, I was blessed to have a particular kind of temperament, so so I can just plow. I just had the anxiety, kind of camouflage myself for a moment, looked at the playing field. So this can be advice. You definitely need to check out the playing field. And then in the back of your head, you always know that being your most authentic self is where your power lies. So if you're going to be a great teacher, you're going to be your best teacher when you are your authentic self. How you do that may depend on the landscape, right? And so how you come out, when you come out, the way that you come out, the way that you are in a relationship, who you're in relationship. You might be in relationship with the queer kids first. You might identify them. You might choose to be, the GSA advisor. You might talk about your family, as I said I did, and you talk about doing it, and it's not right now. I'm going to be my authentic self, and I'm going to talk about my family. You're talking about family within whatever the context is of your teaching or of your relationship, and it's natural. You watch the response, and then you respond to the response. So as I told you, I had a homophobic kid. I am guessing, and I don't know that this is true, but I am guessing that he was actually questioning, and he was a Latino, and he didn't, and his family and his community probably wasn't going to accept him as a queer male. So he was trying to figure out all of the reasons why he couldn't be queer. I'm sorry for that. I kept giving him reasons why he could be. So showing up is, can be different for all different people. My wife was in a school where her boss told her she needed to be discreet. And so, I know how to be discreet, but I also love my wife. So, like when I came to the school to pick her up or deliver something, I am who I am. We didn't have to say, "Hi, this is Carla, my wife,"
Mm-hmm.
but we weren't hiding. People who chose to see who we were could see. People who chose not to didn't or wouldn't. And she eventually got really resentful of being discreet, and we got another job. So making those kinds of decisions really comes from caring about yourself, and understanding the landscape that you're in, why did you choose to be in the school that you chose to be in? What are you trying to get out of the experience? What do you want your students to get out of the experience? I told you I was in a school where that was 98% underrepresented kids. I work in a college that is majority queer, also predominantly white institution. And again, making the decision to change, I was feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm abandoning these, the BIPOC kids. And then I said, yeah, but what I have to share, number one, what we're creating is amazing and important, but also what I have to share as a BIPOC leader is important for white kids to see and to experience. I teach a Cold War civil rights class. We're having race conversations in the Cold War civil rights. Before, we talked about the civil rights movement up to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and then we get to Black Power, and white folks get kicked out of organizations like SNCC, and There's the, Black nationalism. That's the moment where we are right now. So in class, we have to talk about race so we can figure out what happened.
Mm-hmm.
If it was important that it happened or not, how helpful it was, that's where we are now. I get to do that. And that's important. So
Yeah.
I'm also teaching an Afrofuturism class, which is also
That sounds cool.
and important. And in my Cold War Civil Rights class, so the school has a BARD Academy, which is a 9th and 10th grade that feeds into the college. So I'm still teaching in high school because I like it. But so my Cold War Civil Rights class that I'm talking about now, that's 9th and 10th graders that we're having that conversation. My college Cold War Civil Rights course is queered. I queered the course. So, queer leaders like Bayard Rustin, Pauli Murray, Lorraine Hansberry, James Baldwin, those are kind of central folks that we're going to be talking about at the college level and reading about it at the college level. My Afrofuturism class, it is Afrofuturism and also Octavia Butler, Samuel Delaney, Janelle Monáe. So we've got queer authors that we're, Jemison. I get to do that.
That sounds fun.
It is a lot of fun. As fun as yours. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I feel like we have been told for so long, and by we, I mean, like, I can speak from my perspective, that I was told we shouldn't talk about race, we shouldn't talk about religion, we shouldn't talk about money. And, like, those are the things that are, like, taboo. And the problem is, now, those of us who are having conversations about race are, like, sparking fires because people get so angry about it because it's taboo and we should not talk about it. I was defending myself on social media regarding, like, the use of slang and how slang and colloquial language can actually help students to understand content. And that when you take slang and colloquialism away, period, not able to use it in the classroom, and you expect academic English, you are actually building a wall that says that student's identity isn't important to our classroom because the words that they use and how they speak outside of the classroom aren't important and they're not allowed. So that child's going to shut down. It's a hindrance. It's a hurdle that they have to get over. And had so many self-proclaimed liberal people coming at me about it because I boiled it down to the invention of quote unquote standard English and academic English is literally about classism and race. And if you are going to fight so fervently saying that it's not, there's some introspection that needs to happen, and you need to go into understanding, like, the history of it. And I think what you're doing is so important because either at the high school level or at the college level, these conversations about race need to happen so that future conversations about race can happen that are not heated.
Right.
That are just exploring together.
And that's what we're doing. And I waited until the middle of this semester, hopefully created a safe enough space to have the conversation. Am as relaxed as I possibly can be when we're having the conversation. So some of the, the pushback against critical race theory is that it makes, white kids feel guilty. I think that when I am speaking with my students, I think that they are having a hard time. My white students are having a hard time. I can see it in their face. I can see it in their reluctance to speak, some of them, because they're wrestling with understanding privilege or it's so one of the first things that I asked them to do was to free write about the first time in their lives that they understood race or thought that they understood race. And most of my white students said, I didn't have that kind of a moment. I see, my BIPOC, friends struggling with it, but I didn't have so my experience is just largely a reflection of theirs. I had one white student who said, I understand that part of my white privilege is that I don't have to think about race, so I never really thought about it. And then I had my BIPOC students who were telling, some of them are clearly trying to protect their white friends by just saying, I was in a school and and some bad things happened. They don't even want to use the word white right. I have a mixed race student, and that's a whole nother kettle of fish about boxes and not fitting.
Yeah. There's that intersectionality again.
Yeah. Well, she has I'm probably going to get this wrong. No, she has a black mom and a white dad. And when she went to school, she told the teacher that, I think she was like 8, and the teacher said that was nonsense, that she looked Hispanic. So in the school, on her record, it says that she's Hispanic.
What the heck? School have done weird things. My younger son was registered as only speaking Spanish, but like doesn't know any Spanish. And I'm like, where did you get this from? Because like, yes, he's Mexican, but like he doesn't know any Spanish. And so it took a long time for me to get that off, because when you're labeled as an English language learner, it is near impossible to get out of it without testing out of the program.
Correct. You called me Clara at the beginning.
Yes.
In 3rd grade, I was Clara Stephens. It was in the, on my records that my name was Clara Stephens. And so for a whole year, I was Clara Stephens. So
that's what, it's so funny to me when like typos become reality. Because I've had things like, oh, your son's birthday is entered wrong in the system, or, that's not the birthday that's in the system. And I was like, well, that's not his birthday that you're trying to use. So, like, someone fixed the typo, and they're like, here's 17 pages of paperwork.
Yes.
But that's a whole other story for another time.
Yeah, we're talking about systems.
Let's round this out.
Right. Yes.
What do you think that the school community can do? This is parents, teachers, students can do to better support 2S LGBTQIA plus people.
So, not necessarily calling anybody gay as principal, but acknowledging that part of their identity is the beginning.
Yeah.
And feeling seen and acknowledged in that way makes a whole lot of difference. It's kind of sad that it would make so much difference, but when you live in a world where either you felt the need to hide or you've been harassed, about that part of your identity, or your community has been so small because, limited because of that part of your identity, having a larger community just acknowledge that that thing just makes a world of difference. And so, having students that, again, not having to say, oh, that's my gay teacher. That's not what I mean. I mean, just when you talk about your life and the parts of your lives that look different than their lives, then just having that accepted and be, again, woven into conversations and like organically. I'm not talking about forcing anything. I'm just talking about acknowledging some part of a person's humanity, um, in an authentic way. I don't want people going up to say, oh, you're a lesbian and I know 3 other lesbians. That's not.
Do you know each other? Do you know my lesbian friend? We all know each other.
Exactly. That's not what I mean. It's the same thing about what you said about not talking about religion, not talking about money, and not talking about race. Race, class, and religion are huge parts of people's lives. How do you not? And I know, again, that it can be a cause for conflict, but that's what we want it to be, is a cause for conversation, for growing together, for getting to know each other, for, as I said, understanding each other and becoming community despite difference, across difference. So, again, I said that sounds like a really small thing that I think is a really big thing. And then, of course, when there's pushback and things go badly, being upstanders instead of bystanders, that's simple and important. And maybe not so simple, because we talked about intersectionality. Everybody has intersectionality, and everybody has groups that they belong to and has to make decisions about how defending this, group is going to have an impact on my, connection with this other group. One needs to think about that and make good, conscious decisions about what you're doing and what it means. So we had in largely Massachusetts is largely liberal, and in the local middle school we had a GSA advisor who had genderqueer as a resource for her GSA students, and a parent saw it and went ballistic and called the police. And a plainclothes policeman went into the school to look for this book. Crazy. But what I've really felt was positive is that I sat in on some of the school district commission meetings about the incident, and there were a lot of parents who defended the GSA advisor, who, who tried to help the people who were upset to understand that Maya Kobe is a whole human, and that this isn't a graphic novel, it's a graphic memoir. It's about somebody's life. And it is educational because young people need to understand other people's lives. And so, okay, there's like 3 or 4, frames that have drawn body parts and talk about sex in a particular kind of way. There are also a lot of frames where Maya Kobe talks about how excited it was that Aaron learned how to read like in 5th or 6th grade and became a bibliophile. Don't you want your kids to read about somebody having that kind of experience? So how are you taking somebody's life apart because of these things that you're afraid of, right? So even if one has those kinds of fears, figure out how to be in conversation, kind of, you know, t- talk to people about the fears before you go, because that parent has control over what their child is reading. If you don't want your kid to read the book, then you can say the kid can't read the book, but you can't say that nobody else can either. That's so, but my point was that there were upstanding community members that said that was crazy and wrong, and let's have a conversation about it. And the district was good enough to also let the angry parents have their say and talk about how it's pornographic. And so there was a bit of a conversation, because that is something that we tend to do on either side, which is shut down the conversation. Don't shut down the conversation, even if you don't think what the person is saying is kind or right, or if you don't allow them to have a conversation, then you're being the same kind of person who's censoring speech. We don't like it, but you can't educate anybody by saying you're not allowed to think that, and you're not allowed to think that, and you're not allowed to say that. You can say, I hear you saying that your voice isn't more important than mine. And we can talk about how we can compromise, or but trying to shut down the voices altogether ends up in having people exploding, and you don't need exploding people.
No, self-combustion is not on the menu today. No.
No. So yeah. And we talked about this at the conference. If you are a teacher and you are feeling that you're in a dysfunctional or abusive situation, look for community first. Take care of yourself. It's really, really important that if it's time to go, it's time to go. And look for that better opportunity. And so that's
Awesome.
my 3 things.
I appreciate that. At this point, I'm going to turn the mic over to you, and you get to ask me one question to round out our episode.
One question. Can I ask about your kids?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I heard about your, going from California to Texas to New York. How's that transition been for you, not only as an educator, but also as a dad? So, yeah.
So when I moved from California to Texas, my husband saying we should move my initial response was no, absolutely not. And it was for the exact reasons that we ended up leaving Texas that I was worried. But when we got to Texas, the environment politically was more like lavender. Wasn't quite red, wasn't quite blue. Things were moving in a good direction. And my kids in Texas thrived. They had community. They had activities. They participated in things, and they did really well there. In fact, when we made the decision to move to New York City, my oldest son, who's 20, stayed in Texas because after assuring me he was going to hate Texas when we moved, he found it to actually be his home. He feels like San Antonio is his home, and that's great for him. And so the thing that I kind of saw is that I worked in a pretty affluent school district for 4 years. My children went to the school district because it was a perk of working there. My youngest daughter is half black, half white, and she had all of maybe 6 people in the whole school that looked like her. My older kids gravitated towards Mexican community without realizing it. I don't think they just, like most of their friends, were Mexican or Hispanic. I'm from Southern California, so I honestly had never heard the term Hispanic until I moved to Texas, because I'm from, like, at one point I could see Mexico from, like, outside my front yard, living in San Diego. So I saw that happening, and the representation on campus wasn't great. So when we moved here, the one thing that I love is that the area that we live in, as well as like my commute, kind of forces me to be the one white person in the room. And my daughter said something just in passing the other day. She is this wonderful, right now she's got her braids out and she's like really taking care of her natural hair, and she's 10 or almost 10, so she's really like focusing on it. She does work on it at night, she does work on it in the morning before she goes to school. And she goes, a lot of people in my school have my hair. I think that's super cool. And the underlying message was, there are a lot of people at my school that are like me, and I think that's really cool. And when we were in Texas, she was one of a few. And so I wanted her to be in a space where she would be a majority, even if it's only at school, or, you know, even in our little community of the Bronx. Like, it's a very Dominican community, but the Dominican community is incredibly diverse. And so, again, I walk down the street and I'm like the only white person, and I'm totally comfortable with that. I actually was saying this to someone who was doing their research for their dissertation recently, about how I feel most comfortable in diverse spaces. I feel more comfortable than when I am in white spaces, because it's the same white supremacist patriarchy kind of business that vilified queerness. It all kind of comes from the same space. And so it's been really nice for me as a parent to see them thrive in Texas, and that they loved it, and going through the process of like how it hurts to have to leave, but remembering, you know, we have FaceTime now and we have all of these things. You don't have to leave your friends behind just because you left the state. And then getting them to a space where they're the majority in their classroom, and leading, because my kids, like my youngest is the 4th grade class, you know, representative after only have been at the school for 3 weeks. She met everybody in their 4th grade, and she was elected to this position, and she's one of the top students in the 4th grade. And my son is one of the top students in his senior year. And my daughter, and my middle daughter, my older daughter, she is calm. Whereas she was trying to do things in Texas and she didn't like any of them. And she particularly did not like the heat in Texas, which I will vouch for, because there was like 3 months of 100-degree plus weather for the summer. So now she's kind of settled into, I'm going to go to school. And during the summer, I'm going to work. And she has friends, and she started dating people or trying to date people. And she had her first breakup and all of these things that didn't happen when we were in Texas, even though she had like a little community built up and whatnot. So it's good to see that even here they're thriving. And I think part of it is that because we live within New York City, because despite what people from Manhattan say, all 5 boroughs make up the city, they have a lot more independence. They take the train to school. They take the bus to school. They have more independence than even driving the 1.5 miles from our house to their old school when we were in Texas. So I think it's been interesting because as a parent, I'm watching them grow more, because just by the nature of where we live, I have to give them more responsibility and allow them to be trusted on their own. My son's starting to look at colleges, and we're, trying to convince him to stay in the city. He can live here for free. It's going to be cheaper for us, right? College is expensive. And I was like, so take the subway, figure out your route. And he's 17. And I'm like, so take your subway, figure out your route, and figure out which route makes best sense to you. Because yes, you can move 4 hours away to one of the state schools, which is really fantastic, but we're not buying you a car. You're going to have to do everything on campus or walk, or you can take your bike, but like you're pretty limited on transportation. Whereas if you live here, you can get around the whole city in an 1.5 hours on a subway. So it's been nice to kind of have this extra support, I think, with transitioning them into adulthood, because we didn't have to give that kind of responsibility to our oldest son when he was 16 and 17, because he had a car and he drove to school and it was 1 mile away and we all kind of were in the same space. So thanks for asking. Not a lot of people ask about like my kids or the parenting sides of things.
Well, you're welcome.
Well, I also want to take a moment to thank you for spending an hour or so with me today. I really appreciate it. I loved our conversation, and I hope that everybody listening enjoyed it as well.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It was great talking to you, and maybe I'll have a chance to talk to you again. I have more questions.
Oh, I love that. We should absolutely connect again. Before we disconnect, where can people learn about your program at Bard?
Woo, you are so good to me. So the BQLP, if you just Google letter B, letter Q, letter L, letter P at Simon's Rock, you will get our website and yes. So,
I love that. We needed another acronym, and now we have one.
Right. And if you go just on the Bard College at Simon's Rock website, you will also get to the BQLP that way.
Wonderful. So if you are a young person who is interested in that program, or a seasoned person who is interested in that program, go check it out. And thank you all so much for listening. Have a great rest of your day.
And to you, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Teaching While Queer. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Leave a review, and that would help out tremendously. You can also support the podcast by going to www.teachingwhilequeer.com and hit support the show. Thanks so much, and have a great day.